Magandang araw! EA Santos po ulit. Welcome back sa ating PTABCP Business Coaching YouTube channel. I-invite po kita na mag-subscribe dito sa PTABCP Business Coaching YouTube channel. Nag-create ako ng isang page dito sa aking website na kapag ka-clinic mo, ito yung home, no? Kunyari, napunta ka dyan. Napunta ka po sa aking website. I-click mo itong book e-consultation. Book e-consultation, yes. Para makapag-book ka ng appointment or e-consultation sa EA Santos sa akin yun, ano? Yun. Para maiwasan natin yung hindi ka nasasagot. At least nag-alat na ako ng time. Usually in the morning, yung consultation. Meron tayong duration. Pwede ka mamili ng 1 hour or 2 hour dito sa drop-down. At yung booking registration, mamimili ka sa drop-down kung ano yung gusto mong i-consultation duration, no? Mamili ka dyan, yung mga may white, yan yung may mga available na time. At say, halimbawa, 9:30 yung napili mo, i-indicate mo yung email address mo dito, tapos yung full name mo, yung full name ng magpapakonsulta, yung cellphone number ng magpapakonsulta, at saka yung topic na i-consult. Pwedeng maraming topic mo. Tapos dito yung booking overview. So, ito yung venue mo, i-consultation, yung pinili mong duration, 1 hour. Ako yung consultant, 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗧𝗕. Then, yung ating consultation fee is 1,000. Tapos, yung date and time, ito yung pinili mong slot na consultation. Then, i-click mo yan. Tapos, submit. Nilalabas yan na submit successful. Yan po. And then, we will reply sa'yo kapag nasunod mo na yung mga ibang steps, no? First step, yung mapili ka ng slot, then yung mag-fill up ka ng personal information, then pay the advisory and consultancy fee. May ibabatang email sa'yo, nandun po yung information ng GCash and BDO. And then, i-email mo po yung proof of payment. Dito po sa consult@easantospa.com. At least 2 days. At least 2 days po. Ito po ay first pay, first served basis. Ay, ma'am, sir, kung sakaling hindi naman ganun kahaba yung iyong itatanong, kasi mahaba yan naman itong 1 hour duration. Kung hindi ganun kahaba, pa isa-isa lang yung iyong tanong, mag-join ka dito sa Taxpayer Health Group sa FB. Mag-post ka ng question mo dyan. Kung pa isa-isa lang, 2 o yung 3 yung tanong mo. Yan, mag-post ka ng question dyan sa FB page na Taxpayer Health Group. I-approve po namin yan kung legit yung ibig sabihin pang related sa tax o PTABCP topic in question. I-approve po namin yan. Merong sasagot sa inyo dyan na members din ng Taxpayer Health Group.
Ang discussion ko para sa vlog na ito ay bago ako mag-start. Bago ako talaga mag-start, ini-invite po kita or ini-encourage kita na mag-enroll sa aming seminars and workshop. Nagkaroon na po ng iba't ibang variant ang aming bookkeeping guide in actual practice. Ito po yung real life setting na bookkeeping. Meron po kaming PTABCP B32, non-VAT or percentage tax registered seller of services taxpayer or entity. Meron ding PTABCP B33, non-VAT or percentage tax registered seller of goods, taxpayer or entity. Meron din pong PTABCP B42, VAT registered seller of services, taxpayer or entity. Meron ding B43, VAT registered seller of goods, taxpayer or entity. Alright, so itutuloy na natin ang ating vlog. Let's listen. Nag-launch po tayo ng Just Listen. Hashtag Just Listen. Ibig sabihin po nito ay yung mga revenue issuances, batas, laws, codes, or iba't ibang rulings and procedures na nakalap natin o na-research natin ay babasahin lamang natin. Reading mode only, wala siyang lecture. Nang sa gayon, kung ikaw ay nagda-drive, pwede kang mag-tune in sa PTABCP Business Coaching YouTube channel at pakinggan mo kung ano yung issuance, ano yung procedure, ano yung rulings o batas na binabasa po natin. Alright. Sa episode na ito, ang babasahin ko po ay Revenue Regulations number V-1. Yes, tama po kayo. Ito po yung Mother RR o Mother Revenue Regulations ng Bookkeeping. Alright, uumpisahan ko na ang magbasa at makinig po kayo. Republic of the Philippines, Department of Finance, Bureau of Internal Revenue, Manila, March 17, 1947. Revenue Regulations number V-1. The Bookkeeping Regulations. To all internal revenue officers and others concerned. Chapter 1. Scope and definition of terms. Section 1. Scope. Pursuant to the authority granted in Section 4J of Commonwealth Act No. 466, otherwise known as the National Internal Revenue Code, the following regulations relative to the keeping of books of accounts, records, registers, and the issuance of invoices, receipts, tickets, and other supporting papers and documents by persons subject to internal revenue taxes, and the manner of recording business transactions are hereby promulgated and shall be known as Revenue Regulations number V-1 or the Bookkeeping Regulations. Section 2. Definition of terms. As used in these regulations, the following words and phrases shall be taken to mean as follows. Persons, including natural persons and partnerships, associations, companies or corporations, no matter how created or organized. Books of accounts shall include the journal and the ledger and their subsidiaries or their equivalents. Journal is a book of original entry in which the happenings or transactions affecting the business of a taxpayer are recorded consecutively, day by day as they occur. Ledger is a book of final entry to which are posted the classified accounts or items of all transactions entered in the journal or its equivalents. Chapter 2. Books of Accounts and Internal Revenue Books. All corporations, companies, partnerships, or persons required by law to pay internal revenue taxes shall keep a journal and a ledger or their equivalents. Provided, however, that those whose gross quarterly sales, earnings, receipts, or output do not exceed 5,000 shall, at their option, be exempt from the requirements of keeping the books above mentioned. But, unless they do keep the same, they must keep the internal revenue sales and purchase books and other records prescribed by the Bureau of Internal Revenue and any other additional data that the Secretary of Finance may require by rules and regulations, and which may be necessary for the accurate determination of the amount of taxes due the government. Section 334, Commonwealth Act No. 466. Section 3.
Persons required to keep books of accounts. Persons required by law to pay internal revenue taxes whose gross quarterly sales, earnings, receipts, or output, whether subject to percentage tax or not, exceed 5,000 pesos, are required to keep books of accounts in accordance with the standard accounting system. The said books of accounts shall consist of a journal and a ledger, or their equivalents, and shall contain all information necessary for the accurate determination of the internal revenue taxes on their businesses. Section 4. Journals, ledgers, and their equivalents. The journal may consist of only one book, the general journal. Its equivalents may consist of several books, such as sales book, purchase book, cash book, and such other books as the taxpayer may find convenient for his business. Such books are also books of original entries, where all the daily transactions, whether cash or otherwise, are recorded in their chronological order. A journal, in order to comply with the provisions of these regulations, must contain all the transactions affecting the business. Every entry in the general journal shall carry a brief but complete explanation of the nature of the business transaction and be supported by proper vouchers. The general journal shall be in bound form. Where subsidiary journals are used, the same may be either bound or in loose form, provided that the entries in the loose leaf sheets shall be summarized at the end of every month in the general journal, which shall then be posted to the ledger. The ledger, like the journal, may consist of one book, the general ledger. Its equivalents may consist of several ledgers, such as customer's ledger, creditor's ledger, stock ledger, and such other books as the taxpayer may find convenient for his business. All entries in the journal must be posted to the ledger not later than 7 days from the date of the transaction, and shall be classified in the ledger so as to show the assets, liabilities, capital, and the operating accounts, from which a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement covering the operation of the business can be prepared. No entry shall be made in the ledger or its equivalents unless said entry originates from the journal or its equivalents. The general ledger shall be in bound form. Where subsidiary ledgers are used, the same may be either in book form or in loose leaf form, provided that the entries in the loose leaf subsidiary ledger are reflected in the general ledger by a controlling account. In meritorious cases and upon written authority of the Collector of Internal Revenue, the use of the general journal and the general ledger in loose leaf form may be allowed. Section 5. Internal Revenue Books when required. Persons required by law to pay internal revenue taxes on business whose gross quarterly sales, earnings, receipts, or output do not exceed 5,000 pesos may, at their option, keep the regular books of accounts. Otherwise, they shall keep the internal revenue purchase and sales or receipts book and expense book. Section 6. Transactions to be recorded in internal revenue books. Every sale or receipt amounting to 50 pesos or more and the aggregate amount of the daily sales or receipts that are less than 50 pesos each shall be recorded every day in the Internal Revenue Sales Book or Internal Revenue Book of Receipts. Transactions in cash or on credit shall be entered separately in the sales book or in the book of receipts not later than 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day following the date on which the transactions were affected. If there are no sales or receipts within any day, that fact shall be noted in the book within the same period. All purchases and expenditures shall be recorded every day in the Internal Revenue Purchase and Expense Book, showing in detail the quantity and description of the articles purchased, the services rendered, or the expenses incurred, the name and address of the vendor, lessor of the service, or person receiving payment, and the date and the amount of the transaction. Any cash transaction as well as any transaction on credit shall be recorded separately in this book not later than 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day following the date the particular transaction was effected. The books prescribed in this section shall conform substantially with Forms A, A-1, and B of the Appendix, pages 25 to 27 hereof. Section 7. Records of Receipts and Disbursements. All persons subject to any internal revenue tax on their occupation, pursuit, or calling, of whatever nature, or on their income, such as professionals, farmers, property owners, etc., shall, unless they provide themselves with the journal and the ledger or their equivalents, keep a record of their receipts and disbursements. All entries therein shall be made not later than 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day following the date the transaction was effected. However, a person whose only source of income is his salary shall be exempt from keeping the records prescribed in these regulations. Section 8. Entries to be kept up to date in ink or indelible pencil. All entries in the books of accounts and other records must be kept up to date in ink or indelible pencil in a neat and legible manner, and the figures entered in all columns shall be totaled within 24 hours from and after the close of each calendar month, and the totals posted at the foot of the respective columns. All transactions, the time of posting or entry of which is not specifically provided for in these regulations, shall be recorded within 7 days from the date the transactions were effected. Chapter 3. Other Books and Records. All corporations, companies, partnerships, or persons keeping the books of accounts mentioned in the preceding section may, at their option, keep such subsidiary books as the needs of their business may require, provided that where such subsidiaries are kept, they shall form part of the accounting system of the taxpayer and shall be subject to the same rules and regulations as to their keeping, translation, production, and inspection, as are applicable to the journal and the ledger. Section 335, Commonwealth Act No. 466. Section 9, Subsidiary Books. Persons required to keep the books and records mentioned in Section 334 of the National Internal Revenue Code may, at their option, keep such subsidiary books as the needs of their business may require, and such other books as may be required by these regulations. Such books shall be subject to the same rules and regulations as are applicable to the journal and ledger prescribed in Chapter 2 hereof. Section 10. Records to be kept by proprietors or operators of rope factories, sugar centrals, and desiccated coconut factories. Aside from the books and other records required in Chapter 2 of these regulations, proprietors or operators of rope factories, sugar centrals, desiccated coconut factories, and other factories subject to the percentage tax on the gross value of their output or gross sales of their products, shall keep true and correct records of their purchases of raw materials, the finished products, and byproducts. The record of purchases of raw materials shall indicate the kind and quantity of raw materials received, the unit price, and the total value of the said raw materials, the date of receipt, the number of receipt issued therefor, and the name, address, and residence certificate of the persons from whom the raw materials were purchased. The record of finished products and byproducts shall state the date of production and the kind of quantity of the finished products and byproducts, and the record of removals shall show the date of removal, the number of the invoice issued therefor, the kind and quantity of the finished products or byproducts, the unit price and the total selling price or market value thereof, and the name, address, and residence certificate of the purchaser or the person to whom delivery is made. The proprietor or operator of a factory or mill may adopt such a system of keeping his records as may be convenient for his business, provided that the system adopted truly reflects all his transactions and his books contain all the desired information. All his purchases shall be covered by the corresponding receipts, except when the person from whom the same are made has issued invoices therefor, in which case the proprietor or operator may keep the said invoices in lieu of issuing receipts therefor, provided that said invoices show the information herein required. Every removal of the finished products or byproducts shall be covered by an invoice showing the date of removal, the kind and quantity of the finished product or byproduct removed, the unit price and the total selling price or market value thereof, and the name, address, and residence certificate of the purchaser or the person to whom delivery is made. Proprietors or owners of rice mills and corn mills shall keep the records and issue the receipts and invoices prescribed in Revenue Regulations No. 7, Rice and Corn Mills Regulations. Section 11. Record of jobs received by contractors. Road, building, waterworks, and other construction work, contractors and other persons subject to tax under Section 191 of the National Internal Revenue Code
shall, in addition to the books and other records required in Chapter 2 of these regulations, keep a register book for job orders received in which they shall enter immediately upon making a contract the date, name, and address of the customer, a description of the articles to be constructed or the services desired, the considerations therefore, and the amount of deposit or partial payment, if any. And upon completion and delivery of the subject matter of the contract, the date of completion or delivery and the amount paid therefor. Keepers of hotels and lodging houses may, in lieu of the records of jobs received, keep a guest register book in which shall be entered immediately upon accepting a guest the date and the time of his arrival, the name and address of the guest, and the number of the room to be occupied, and upon checking out, the date and the time of his departure and the amount paid by him. The entries shall be numbered consecutively for purposes of reference. The entries shall be numbered consecutively for purposes of reference. The books prescribed herein shall conform substantially with Form C of the Appendix, page 28 hereof. In case of the taxpayers enumerated in Section 191 of National Internal Revenue Code finds the use of the register book for jobs received impracticable for his business, he may devise such a system of keeping his books and other records as may be appropriate for his particular business, and submit said books and records for approval to the Collector of Internal Revenue, if his place of business is in Manila, or to the Provincial Revenue Agent if in the province. No such books and records may be used until they are duly approved in accordance with Section 19 of these regulations. Section 12. Records to be kept by brokers. Aside from the books and other records required in Chapter 2 of these regulations, stockbrokers, dealers in securities, real estate brokers, real estate dealers, commercial, customs, and immigration brokers shall use serially numbered contract forms, which shall be issued in chronological order for each agreement had with their customers, showing the date and other facts concerning the services rendered or to be rendered, and the signature of the parties thereto. The contracts shall be recorded every day in a registered book, showing the date and number of the contract, the name of the customer, the services desired, the subject matter, and the subject thereof in case of properties, the compensation agreed upon, and the duration of the contract. And upon termination of the contract, a remark as to the date and number of the receipt issued for the compensation received. The contracts shall be filed in the office of the broker in numerical order, together with copies of all papers concerning the transactions. In case of commercial brokers representing foreign companies, copies of the orders such as cablegrams, telegrams, radiograms, etc. shall be filed with the corresponding file copies of the contracts. These pertinent papers need not be filed with the file copies of the contracts where a filing system is employed, such that Said papers are readily available by reference appearing on the file copies of the contracts. Section 13. Record of inventories. Persons required by law to pay internal revenue taxes on business shall keep, in addition to the other books and records prescribed in these regulations, a book of inventories, in which they shall record in detail the quantity, description, unit cost, and total cost of every item of their stocks in trade, materials, supplies, and all other goods found in the premises of their establishments, at the time they start business and at the close of the calendar year or accounting period. The inventory at the beginning shall be made and submitted to the Collector of Internal Revenue, if the place of business is in Manila, or to the Deputy Provincial or City Treasurer, if in a municipality or city, within 10 days after securing the privileged tax receipt or starting the business, and the subsequent inventories not later than 30 days after the close of the calendar year or accounting period. This period may, in meritorious cases, be extended by the Collector of Internal Revenue. Deputy Provincial and City Treasurers shall, upon receipt of such inventories, immediately send the same to the corresponding Provincial Revenue Agent, who shall keep and preserve them for purposes of reference. Chapter 4. Invoices or Receipts. All persons subject to percentage tax shall, for each sale or transfer of merchandise, or for services rendered, valued at 2 pesos or more, prepare and issue sales or commercial invoices or receipts, serially numbered in duplicate, showing, among other things, their names or styles, if any, and business address. Provided that in case of sales, receipts or transfers in the amount of 50 pesos or more, the invoices shall further show the name or style, if any, and business address of the purchaser. The original of each sales invoice or receipt shall be issued to the purchaser or customer, if engaged in any taxable business. Shall keep and preserve the same in his place of business for a period of 5 years from the date of the invoice. The duplicate to be kept and preserved by the person subject to percentage tax, also in his place of business for like period, provided that persons subject to percentage tax whose gross sales or receipts during the last preceding year exceed 20,000 pesos shall, for each sale or transaction, issue an invoice irrespective of the value of the articles sold or service rendered. The Collector of Internal Revenue may, in meritorious cases, exempt any person subject to percentage tax from compliance with the provisions of this section. Section 204, Commonwealth Act No. 466 as amended by Commonwealth Act No. 526 and Section 9, Republic Act No. 48. Section 14. Vouchers for transaction. Persons paying internal revenue taxes who are required to keep the books of accounts mentioned in Section 334 of the National Internal Revenue Code shall have a voucher for each entry in their books. The voucher may be an invoice, receipt, check, or other document, which shall show the details of each transaction. Persons subject to the percentage tax shall issue a sales or commercial invoice for each sale or transfer of merchandise or for services rendered valued at 2 pesos or more. In case the transaction is valued at less than 2 pesos, the taxpayer need not issue any invoice, but unless it is issued, The transaction must be recorded immediately after it is effected in a record or petty sales or transactions, the entries in which shall be summarized at the end of the day and the total transferred to the journal or internal revenue sales book or book of receipts. If the gross sales or receipts of a person during the preceding year exceed 20,000 pesos, every sale or transaction effected by him shall be covered by an invoice irrespective of the amount of the sale or transaction. Persons paying internal revenue taxes other than the percentage tax shall issue an invoice or receipt for any amount of money received by them in connection with their business. However, in case the amount received is less than 2 pesos, no invoice or receipt need be issued. But unless it is issued, the amount must be recorded immediately upon receipt thereof in a record of petty sales or receipts. The entries in which shall be summarized at the end of the day and the total transferred to the journal or internal revenue sales or receipts book. The record of petty sales or receipts may be dispensed with if a cash register machine with roll sheets is used to record all petty transactions. The entries in the roll sheets shall be summarized at the end of the day and the total transferred to the journal or to the internal revenue sales or receipts book. The said roll sheets shall be identified by the signature or initials of the taxpayer or his bookkeeper or manager and shall show the dates of the transactions therein recorded. Every purchase or expenditure by a taxpayer subject to these regulations shall also be supported by an invoice or a receipt issued by the vendor or the person rendering the service. In case an invoice or a receipt is not issued, the taxpayer concerned shall require the vendor to sign a purchase or expense voucher showing the date, the quantity, and description of the articles purchased or the services rendered, the consideration paid therefor, and the name and address of the vendor or lessor together with the number, date, and place of issue of his residence certificate. The collector of internal revenue may, in meritorious cases, exempt a person from compliance with these regulations. Section 15. Form and manner of issuance of invoices and receipts. An invoice or a receipt, in order to comply with the requirements of these regulations, must be serially numbered and made at least in duplicate. They shall be bound in the form of booklets or pads of 50 or 100 each, and shall show, among other things, the name and address and the business style, if any, of the person issuing the same, and shall contain such columns as may be necessary and appropriate for the business of the taxpayer concerned. The invoices or receipts may have as many duplicate copies as may be necessary for the purposes of the taxpayer. But the duplicate copy shall bear the same serial number as the original. Where the transaction is required to be covered by an invoice or receipt, the same shall be issued at the time the transaction is effected, and the original thereof delivered to the purchaser or to the person from whom payment is received. In the case of sales invoices, they shall show the date of the transaction, the quantity and description of the merchandise, the unit cost, and the total price. In case of a sale or transfer in the amount of 50 pesos or more, the invoice shall also show the name or style, if any, the business address of the purchaser, and the number, date, and place of issue of his residence certificate. In the case of other invoices, they shall show the date, the description of the articles, or the nature of the service, the consideration paid therefor, and the name,
address and residence certificate of the persons furnishing the articles or rendering the service. The residence certificate need not appear in the invoice when the other party to the transaction is a corporation or a registered partnership or association. Alright, i-end ko muna dito itong pagbabasa hanggang section 15. So, in this recording, sections 1 to 15 lamang ang aking binasa. Sa susunod na recording, section 16 and onward yung aking babasahin. I would like to inform you na itong Revenue Regulations number V-1 ay kasama sa aming compilations ng Bookkeeping and Books of Accounts, Regulations, and Issuances. Itong compilation na ito ay ibinibigay po namin ng libre sa aming mga estudyante sa DOD courses ng Bookkeeping Guide in Actual Practice. So kapag kayo po ay nag-enroll at nagbayad for a DOD course, meron po kayong matatanggap na hard copies ng regulations na ito. Yung compilation of Bookkeeping and Books of Accounts, Regulations, and Issuances. Alright, this ends our reading. Bye for now. See you po sa susunod na recordings. Yung mga seminars namin in the past, may mga seminars kami na pinamimigay na namin ng libre. That is via YouTube. Wala nga lang tong mga certificates. Kapag kami certificate, hindi dyan ang punta. Doon sa Let's Learn Online. Nasaan ang Let's Learn Online? Ito. Preview. Ayan. Kapag ka nasa loob ka ng Let's Learn Online, ganito ang iyong virtual school room, classroom. Yan. Pero, yan. O, ganito ang Let's Learn Online. Nandito nakahouse ang mga video on demand. Yan. Yung mga may kailangan ng certificates, yun, you have to enroll dito. Pero kung hindi mo naman kailangan ng certificates, dito ka na lang. No. Nasa free, merong mga free seminars and workshops. Itong mga to. Lalo na yung Accounting 101. Ito, nilagay na po namin dito. Yun. Invite po kita, no? Meron kaming webinars, pero video on demand, through video on demand courses. Nagkaroon na kami ng iba't ibang variant ng Bookkeeping Guide in Actual Practice or Real Life Setting courses. Ito yung PTABCP B32 para sa mga non-VAT or percentage tax yung registration niya. Registered Seller of Services Taxpayer or entity. Yung B33, non-VAT or percentage tax registered seller of goods or entity. Then, yung B42, VAT registered seller of services taxpayer or entity. And then, itong B43, registered seller of goods taxpayer or entity. Ayan po ang aming iba't ibang BKG or B-series na VOD courses. Ito po ang laman ng mga courses na ito. Ayan. Meron kang matatanggap na dalawang materials para doon sa iyong BKG VOD course. Meron yung lecture at saka yung practice set or yung workbook. Ang dinidiscuss sa materials, yung mga gentle reminders natin, mga regulations sa bookkeeping and books of accounts. Ayan. Then, yung dinidiscuss dito, yung mga accounting methods. Ayan. Ang bookkeeping hindi basta-basta kasi depende yan sa accounting method na ginagamit mo. Merong accrual, di ba, at saka cash basis. Pero meron ding sinasabi ang tax code tungkol sa accounting method na gagamitin. Ganon din yung 𝗕𝗔𝗫 ruling, nagpalabas ang 𝗕𝗔𝗫 ruling about sa accounting method. No? Tapos yung conform sa basic framework, dinidiscuss natin yan. And then yung mga tax jurisdictions or tax regimes na pinagdadaanan ng mga business transaction.
Dinidiscuss natin yan. Tapos yung documentation to support your entries in your books of accounts. Kasi si BIR, no, napaka-importante sa kanya ng documentation. Kapag ka makikipag-transact ka, ensure that you have source documents. Yung valid, legit, yung relevant, admissible, yung ganyan. And material sa transaction. So, ito yan. Dinidiscuss natin yung mga yan. And then, dinidiscuss din natin paano tayo mag-i-strategize ng bookkeeping. Huwag yung basta magbo-bookkeeping ka lang, ma'am o sir, kasi madadali tayo sa LOA. Kailangan kapag nabigyan ka ng LOA, isa ka sa pinalad na nabigyan ng letter of authority, ibig sabihin, sinasubject ka sa investigation, tax audit investigation, no? Ang nangyayari sa LOA, yung mga dokumento mo na lang ang kausap ng BIR examiner. Wala ka doon o yung staff mo para magpaliwanag. Kaya ang gagawin mo, dapat pag magbo-bookkeeping ka, alam mo na mag-i-stand up ang iyong mga records, documents, and books. So, paano natin gagawin yon? Dito natin pinag-uusapan sa Part 5, yung strategizing your bookkeeping. Yan. And then, ito yung ating lecture. Pagdating naman sa practice set, ano yung ating ginagawa? Ito, no? Meron tayong review ng books of accounts at kung paano tayo magbo-bookkeeping. Tapos, i-identify natin. Ano ba? Anong tawag dito? I-ID natin si taxpayer o ikaw bilang business owner. Ano yung mga tinitingnan sa'yo ng BIR examiner? As a business owner, ano ka? Knowing the subject taxpayer. No? So, dapat na mo yan. Nalalaman mo rin kung ano ba yung paano ka kinikilatis ng BIR examiner yon. And then ito, importante, yung bookkeeping setup mo. Ano ba yung chart of accounts mo? Ano yung uses and purposes ng iyong mga libro? Ayan, ikaw yung dapat nagsasabi kung ano yan. Of course, dapat aligned ka sa tax code, Tapos yung mga pro forma bookkeeping entries. Etong pinaka-importante, yung mga bookkeeping entries mo sa iba't ibang transaction. Capital contribution, sales-related transaction, sa collection, yan, pagka may CWT o kaya walang CWT, yung mga payment mo ng mga VAT purchases tsaka disbursements kapag ka bumili ka, ano ang transaction, pag nagbayad ka, ano yung transaction. Siyempre, minsan bumibili ka rin sa hindi VAT o kaya sa hindi non-VAT. Diba? Yung mga ganon. Paano yung pag-e-entry sa mga transactions with them? Tapos, nagpapasweldo ka, yan. Ano yung entry para sa mga payroll? And, ayun, sa mga SSS PhilHealth Pag-ibig, ano yung entry? Pag nagpa-file ka ng return, may entries yung mga yan. No? Tsaka, pag nagbabayad ka, may entries ang mga... Yes. Yes. Bakit napapa-yes ako? Karamihan kasi ng mga nagiging client ko, hindi naglalagay ng entry para sa accrual and payment ng kanilang tax dues. Iba-iba pa naman yung mga tax dues nyo or tax types, no? Merong withholding tax sa compensation, EWT, VAT, and income tax. Hindi naglalagay ng entry. Aminin daw. Ayan, tapos yung movement ng inyong capital. Pag nag-withdraw ka, ano yung mga entry, ayan. Yung part 4, ito yung ating ibu-bookkeeping. Ano to mga totoong kliyente, yung totoong entity, kliyente. Ano yan, mga totoong entity yung ating sample dito. So, kung paano sila bookkeeping, paano yung ginawa sa kanila, tinuturo po natin dito yon. And then, pinaka-workshop talaga. Gagawa ka ikaw kunyari si bookkeeper, ikaw yung gagawa ng mga entries. Tinuturuan ko rin kayo dito ng automation sa MS Excel. Kaya meron tayong mga pivot table. I-automate mo yung ginawa mo sa iyong Excel para mas mabilis makapag-come up ng trial balance at saka financial statement. Yun kasi yung mahirap eh. Kaya hirap na hirap yung at the end of the year, hirap na hirap ang mga bookkeeper and accountants. Lalo na kapag naka-MS Excel ang mga clients o ang mga yung mga taxpayers. Nahihirapan sila sa pagbuo ng general ledger. Kasi sa general ledger, dapat muna yun eh. Buo muna yun bago ka gagawa ng trial balance or FS. Pero with with this workshop, tinuturo namin sa inyo yung mas mabilis na pamamaraan para makapag-come up tayo ng mas mabilis na trial balance. Kaya relax lang ang aming mga client. Alright, next, eto na yung simpleng worksheet na ginagawa ng auditor. Ituturo din namin sa inyo. And then, eto. So, etong workshop ay pwede sa mga naka-loose leaf na manual books of accounts at saka yung mga manual books of accounts, yung physical lang talaga, yung nabibili sa store. Tinuturo namin kung paano mag-bookkeeping sa mga yan. And syempre, bibigyan ka namin ng solution keys or key answer para maikumpara mo naman ang iyong sagot sa aming sagot. Alright. So, ayan po. Hi, ma'am! Ay, paano naman po mag-enroll dyan sa inyong bookkeeping course, bookkeeping guide in actual practice? Alright, para makapag-enroll ka, pupunta ka dito sa aming site. Actually, ito yon, diba? So, i-click mo yan, yung seminars and workshop, dito ka mapupunta. Dito ka mapupunta sa page na to. So, mamili ka, ano ka ba? Ano yung identity mo? Ano ka? VAT Registered Seller of Services ka ba? I-click mo yon. Okay, so napunta ka na rito. Basa-basa ka muna ng mga matututunan mo, para kanino, ano yung mga gagawin, andyan. Tapos, ano yung laman ng course? Yan nga, yung lecture at saka yung workshop na materials. Tapos, yung discussion nasa video on demand. So, itong courses natin, ino-offer natin either face-to-face o kaya yung video on demand or VOD. Sa face-to-face, kasi nga pandemic ngayon, so wala mo ng face-to-face. Maliban nila kung merong gustong group yung group yung setting. Kunyari sa training room nila na pwedeng social distancing. Yan, pwede yun. So, sa 10 or more group participants, only lang to i-offer. Yung VOD setting naman, ideal ito doon sa mga study anytime, anywhere. So, basta meron kang internet connection, pwede ka mag-aral ng BKG, Bookkeeping Guide in Actual Practice. Yan lang no, ako isa-suggest ko, computer ang gamitin mo, wag yung phone o kaya yung tablet. Kasi gagamit ka ng MS Excel. So, kung gagamit ka ng MS Excel, mahirap sa tablet or sa phone gumamit ng MS Excel. Meron kang freebie. Kasi minsan, di ba, yung gusto mo nang mag-bookkeeping, hindi mo pa naman alam ano ba yung mga basic terminologies, ano yung mga generally accepted accounting principles, yung mga ganyan. Kailangan matutunan mo muna yon, paano ba mag-debit at mag-credit. Kasi dito sa lecture ng BKG at saka workshop, hindi ituturo sa'yo yung konsepto ng debit at credit. Saan itinuturo yon? Dito sa AC 101 or yung Accounting 101. Yan. Regardless mo FTF or VOD, bibigyan ka po nun para aralin mo muna siya bago ka mag-proceed dito sa courses na ito. Tapos, bibigyan ka ng hard copies ng training materials. Kahit ikaw ay VOD, yung pinili mo, ipapadala ang iyong training materials kasama ng Certificate of Enrollment at ng iyong official receipt. Now then, freebies, kung ano yung available na freebies during your enrollment. Alright. Now, paano ka mag-enroll? Sa FTF, eto, no? Normally, 3 days training yon. Because it is a 3 days training and we are paying for the venue at saka yung mga ibang expenses dyan. Ang investment mo per enrollee ay 20,000. Ang investment fee ay depende sa kung anong course. No? Hindi pare-pareho yung investment fee ng mga yan. Ito lang sa sample natin. For the B42, B42 ang FTF niya ay 20,000 net per enrollee. Ma'am, ang mahal. That's why we created the VOD. Para kung ano itinuturo dito, matutunan mo din. No? Ang investment fee mo dyan ay 6,000 net per enrollee. So, dito, meron kang 60 days access. Normally, since 3 days nga to, kung tutuloy-tuloyin mo ang pag-aaral, kaya mong aralin ng 3 days. Itong ano na to. Itong training na ito. Yan. Ang ano lang dito, kaya 60 days ang ibinigay namin sa'yo para ma-manage mo yung time mo. Kasi minsan, di ba, nagwo-work ka pa o kaya meron ka pang inaalagaan na anak o kaya nag-aaral ka. So, pwede mong hati-hatiin yung time mo. Basta within the 60 days access, i-avail mo yon. Kasi, madede-enroll ka after the 60 days. Now, after the 60 days, ma'am, hindi ko siya natapos. Ma'am, kaya ka naman binigyan ng 60 days para in consideration na mahina yung internet mo, na walang ka ng internet. So, kung malakas ang internet mo, grab the chance. At saka ito naka-design na tawag dito, na maaral mo siya ng at least mga 3 times. Kaya i-grab mo yung yung access period mo kasi sayang yung course. Eto pa naman kapag master mo siya, natutunan mo siya, yung mga ibang staff namin nagre-resign na kasi kung ano yung template na binigay ko dito, yun din yung ginagamit namin sa sa mga clients namin. Ang nangyayari, nagre-register na sila ng mga bookkeeping services. Kaya yun na yung kanilang ginagamit na template. So, tawag dito, ang purpose natin dito sa VOD para madalian ka sa bookkeeping at saka yun, matutunan mo yung naaayon sa tax code na pagbo-bookkeeping. Siyempre, pati yung yung bookkeeping, kasi sinasabi naman sumunod sa basic framework. Yung pagbo-bookkeeping natin dito, sumusunod tayo sa basic framework na binabanggit, no? Yan lang, dinadagdagan natin ng yung mga sinasabing provisions ng tax code. Yan siya. Tapos ito, i-fill up mo yan. I-click mo ito to fill up the form yan. Mapupunta ka dyan. So, indicate mo yung iyong information, full name, nickname, email. Ay, yung email i-double check ninyo kasi baka kulang ng M. gmail.com lang. Wala hindi siya COM. Hindi ka mababatuhan ng hindi ka mababatuhan ng information. So, may tumatawag na lang sa amin, ma'am, nag-register po ako, pero walang notification. Parang walang email notification na nag-register siya. Kasi yung email na naipasok dito ay may mali or may kulang na letter doon sa kanyang email na nailagay. And then, yung contact number mo, yun. Tsaka ito, your company name, kung kung may company ka. Kasi minsan yung official receipt ipinapapangalan sa company. So, para dyan yun. Now, additional enrollees or remarks, doon sa mga practitioner or kaya bookkeeper, ilagay mo na practitioner or bookkeeper para eventually, kung meron kaming client na naghahanap ng malapit sa area mo, babatuhan ka namin ng client. Kasi minsan, malayo o kaya hindi na, during the time na nag-inquire siya, hindi na namin ma-accommodate. Yung mga enrollee namin na practitioner or bookkeeper, ibinabato namin sa kanila yung client. Hinaharis. Na binibigyan namin ng kung merong nag-inquire, yun, kayo na yung bahala mag-usap tungkol sa inyong service fee or professional fee. Tapos then, are you human? Sagutin mo lang, then register now. So, ganun lang siya. Tapos, mayroon kang marireceive na email notification. From registration, paano ka magpo-proceed with the payment at saka kailan ka mabibigyan ng grant or access doon sa VOD course. Yung VOD course, nandito siya. Nandyan. Diyan ka namin i-enroll. Yan. So, yun din, no? Kapag ka nag-pay ka, mag-sign up ka dito sa Let's Learn Online para mabigyan ka ng access sa video on demand courses. Alright. Ang ating objective ay be tax literate, magkaroon ng tax literacy ang mga Filipino business owners. Dahil ang sinasabi ng ating batas, Article 3 ng NCC New Civil Code, ignorance of the law excuses no one from compliance therewith. Kaya natin sinasabi yan, kasi ma'am, sir, masigasig ang collection ng BIR. Kapag ka nakakita sila ng mga dapat i-kolekta sa'yo, gagamit sila ng batas na sinasabi nilang na-violate mo para makakollect sa'yo, no? So, yun ma'am. Tax literacy, be tax literate. Alright. Abangan po kita sa susunod na mga videos. And subscribe ka, ma'am, sir, ha, kung nakatulong ito sa'yo at gusto mo pa magkaroon ng karagdagang kaalaman para sa mga susunod kong videos, hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching. Bye!